Yeah. Hi, Raymond,
Hi, Mary.
and thanks for being the guest in my podcast. And we have been knowing each other for a while. So when I first spoke to you, I found your background, your story as so fascinating. And that is the reasons why you was one of the first few people I really wanted to be in this channel. So you grew up in Beirut.
Yes. Well, first of all, thanks a lot for having me on the podcast. Very happy to be here. But yes, to your question, I did grow up in Beirut. I was actually born in Brazil, in São Paulo. And when I was around 4, my dad went to work in Lebanon, and we all moved with him to Beirut because he's Lebanese, my mom's Brazilian. So,
Wow.
yeah.
So you grew up speaking 4 languages.
Yes. So I grew up speaking originally 3, and I learned the 4th in Lebanon. So I grew up, and my mother tongue is technically Portuguese, but it's not the one I speak the best. I learned Portuguese by being in Brazil and by speaking to my mom in Portuguese. But I did school in French. So I learned French that way. And then English is something I picked up from movies and TVs and like what are they called? Cartoons, like Cartoon Network and stuff like that. Which is why I sound American for some reason.
Yeah.
And or at least a lot of people think I sound American, except for Americans. And then I had cousins who lived in, who would visit me in Brazil every summer because I'd go to Brazil and they'd meet up with me, who were from Argentina. And the only language we had in common was Portuguese because I didn't speak Spanish at the time. Sorry, it was English. And so we were speaking English amongst ourselves. And then in Lebanon, I started learning Arabic as I grew up. But since my dad didn't speak Arabic very well at the time, I couldn't practice a lot at home. So it took me like 10, 11 years after moving. So it was only around when I was in my early teenage years that I started actually speaking Arabic. And the way I learned that is by forcing myself to speak to like every taxi driver, every time I was ordering food and everything. I used to do it in French or in English. I just forced myself to do it in Arabic, and that really helped me actually start speaking Arabic. Speak it very well, but I speak it well enough.
Fascinating. So the reasons why I really want to have you in this conversation is because the purpose of the podcast is about finding who we are. It's like, who am I for ourselves? And by having a unscripted dialogue and real conversation to understand more about you, your background, your belief system, your value, that I hope myself and other listeners could feel associated with, or could really find a way to find their own voice or stand in the complex society we are facing nowadays.
Yeah, it's true. Society is increasingly more globalized, so there's no more of this like, oh, I'm just from a certain place, or I'm just from there. Like a lot of international couples and international kids are popping up more and more, amongst other things of where like cultures are just constantly mixing. So I think it's a good idea.
Talking about that, since you mentioned you grew up in a family where you speak Portuguese with your father.
I speak French with my father
and Portuguese with your mother.
With my mother, and English with my siblings.
Wow. So how is that experience? And now let's say if there are couples who are coming from different backgrounds, speaking different mother tongues, and they're listening to the podcast, and they wonder how should they raise their children in the future? What would be their experience sharing with them?
Yeah, I mean, it felt very normal to me. And this is actually something that I didn't notice until I left Lebanon, because Lebanon's a country also where you have people who speak at least 2 languages, and usually 3. And so there's a lot of Lebanese will tell you we have our own language, which is Lebanese, which is where you use whatever word fits best. Either it's in English, French, or Arabic. And so switching languages has always been very easy to me. But when I'm dating my girlfriend now who's from Russia, and she has a hard time when she's speaking English, just instantly switching to Russian and vice versa. Like it takes her a while to kind of try and get that. And so for me, it's just been very normal. What I will say in terms of advice for parents is probably say you have two parents with two different mother tongues. If you want the kid to learn both, I'd say you talk to the child in your native language and your partner in their native language. And then if you want the kid to learn a third language, put them in a schooling system that is another language. So for example, if I were to get married to my girlfriend and we would be trying to teach our kids to speak Portuguese, Russian, and English. So I'd speak to my kid in Portuguese. She'd speak to our kid in Russian. And then we put the kid in an English system so that he'd learn English and he'd be able to learn all those languages. I think I read that somewhere, but sure.
That's how a lot of efforts as well.
Yeah, it also it's something that can just be done a bit naturally. Obviously, when you're in like a family setting and everything, and everyone needs to understand each other, you speak the language that everyone understands. But there's a lot of situations where you're one-on-one with your kid anyway. Picking them up from school, or someone's home late from work, etc. Those are the situations in which it's very important, I think, to use your own language, because language ultimately is a very big part of the culture. And so I think it's important, if you want your kid to appreciate the culture they come from, to also learn the language. I mean, I resisted learning Arabic for a really long time because I didn't like it. I just didn't like the language. It was too difficult. Somehow I didn't feel like I always felt Brazilian when I was in Lebanon. So I didn't want to be Lebanese. And there was like a big resistance there. And I really regret that, because I resisted learning Arabic for so long that I don't speak it very well now. And now I think it's one of my favorite languages. I think it's beautiful. I really like it. And I feel now much more Lebanese than I do Brazil. I feel both. But if you were to ask me where am I from, I'd probably say Lebanon if I had to choose one or the other.
And can you tell me about maybe some of the opportunities that have knowing multiple language and coming from several different culture and backgrounds has opened up opportunities for you, so that people now they think that it's worth all the efforts to put in?
It's funny. My dad always told me, he's like, you always have to put on your CV front and foremost, you speak 4 languages. Well, I put 5 because I'm an intermediate in Spanish. I can understand it, but I don't speak it very well. And I think it is something that's quite eye-catching. Do I think it can replace the skills of someone, or make really a bad CV good, or like a bad employee good? No, but it is definitely a very good addition to it, because especially if you're in client-facing roles, like I am, I'm in sales at Google. It just allows you to have that little connection with the person who also speaks your language. For example, I had someone I was talking to from an agency or whatever was French, and I just instantly switched to French to speaking to them. And I think they were very relieved, because they were working in London. So they didn't have a lot of opportunities to practice their French. It also helps open up the doors to working in different markets. For example, I worked at Microsoft in France, and I actually applied to a few jobs here in Google for the French market, but for some reason they took me for the UK. I don't know why, but I assumed more people spoke English than French. But I'm quite happy working here for the UKI market. But it's definitely very useful as well, just for traveling. I can go to any French-speaking country, any English-speaking country, and any Portuguese-speaking country, even Spanish-speaking countries, and I can get around quite easily because I have those languages. there's really no downside to it.
Yeah.
And that's like the best part.
We can come back to the part of Microsoft later, because it was an interesting piece. I want to understand a bit more.
Sure.
I wanted to know a little bit more, and for many people who hearing this now, you was born in Brazil, grew up in another country in Middle East, and now you're working was in Paris and now in Dublin.
Yes.
How was that different? Like growing up in different culture has shaped your probably belief system or your worldview?
Definitely. I mean, it's difficult to say how it changed it, because I feel like this has always been sort of a part of me. It's not like there was this big shift in like my perception of the world, but I think what it allowed me to do is kind of be a bit more empathetic towards things that are different, you know? I know that it's very easy to be sort of lost in a culture. Well, lost is a strong word, but you know, you're in a culture, you get taught what's right and wrong. You get taught all of these beliefs, these ways of behaving, and it's only when you start experiencing other cultures and you really immerse yourself in them that you start understanding that, you know, there are some guidelines of like what pretty much every society thinks is good or bad. But it changes from culture to culture. Whether that's good or bad is not something that I'm qualified to say. But it's easy to understand why people do things they do, and kind of understand it from a more cultural perspective, as opposed to a just like, oh, they're not a good person, or like, oh, that's very nice of them. They're like a really good person. They're so kind and everything. Maybe they come from a culture where, you know, helping each other out is very encouraged, whereas you could also come from a culture where, you know, it's not frowned upon, but it's not something that's necessarily very encouraged. Like, for example, Lebanon, you know, you take care of your family, and your family in Lebanon is all of your cousins. So if your dad's father's best friend's nephew has a kid and you can help them, without too much detriment to yourself, it's just like, you know, refer them to a company, give them some advice on certain things that you can give advice on. It's something that you'll do. It's something that you try and do. You take care of your family. Whereas I've known, like I've gone to some cultures where it's very much like the nuclear family is the main family, and cousins are they're cousins, they're closer to you and everything, but they're not as important.
Yeah, absolutely. So that is upsides, right? How about a little bit more challenging side? You know, have you ever felt that the questions about your own cultural identity? Per se?
That's a very good question, because wow, this is something that I even had to go to therapy for. I was in a bit of a strange situation where, I was very privileged. Obviously, every summer, every Lebanese summer, I'd spend it in Brazil. And I say Lebanese summer because Brazil's in the southern hemisphere, so it's technically winter in Brazil. So every school, like for all of my school years, every single summer from June to August, I'd spend it outside of Lebanon. I'd spend it in Brazil. I had family there. My sisters moved there when I was like quite young, because they're quite a bit older than me. And so there would be this sort of gap in my relationship with all of my friends and everything. Whereas when I'd come back, a lot of dynamics would change. And it didn't allow me to immerse myself as much in the Lebanese culture as some of my friends would have. But on the other hand, every time I went to Brazil, I was never like, people could tell I had an accent. People could tell that I didn't have the right vocabulary. I wasn't up to date with the slang. I had a bit more difficulty talking in Portuguese. So in Brazil, I was Lebanese, and in Lebanon, I was Brazilian. And that made it kind of like I was never, and for a long time, this is something I also took personally, where I never felt like I never really knew who I was, and culturally speaking. Now I've come to terms, and this is a joke I used to do, but it's, you know, it's sort of the reality. I love to say I'm cosmopolitan because I've lived in different cultures, but it's not too far from the truth, where you know, I think I appreciate both cultures very, very much. I love them both. You know, I feel like I'm someone who's very patriotic as well, both towards Brazil and Lebanon. You know, when there's issues in Brazil or issues in Lebanon, like I feel it as well. They're countries that I love and cultures that I love. And it was just getting to the point where embracing both of them, and understanding that I was belonging to both, and like allowing myself to be okay with that, was very difficult, because people didn't make it easy, and not from a malicious point. Like no one would ever come to me as like, "Ah, you're not Lebanese, you're Brazilian," or no one would come to me, "Ah, you're not Brazilian, you're Lebanese." There was mostly like jokes and teasing and stuff. But it's a very difficult thing when you're a kid growing up, because like identity is a very important thing. So I guess an advice I would give people is try and be a bit like, understand that some jokes, some teasing might seem harmless, but it might inflict a bit of harm, or like a bit of like issues into people. I don't know if that answered your question. I ramble a lot. I'm really sorry.
No, absolutely. I can completely resonate with that, even though my experience was not drastic, like what you went through. But I think it's a very eye-opening for many people who have grown up or childhood in several countries and moving across a lot. So that, yeah. To back to the part you mentioned about, so we talk about culture and childhood.
Yep.
To the past, where now we bring both of us go to the journey. Now you're in Paris. You was in Paris, and you're working for companies that belong to AT&T, and later on was acquired by Microsoft.
Yes.
And you have a period of time on a career break, doing some self-discovery. So tell us more about that.
A career break is a nice way of putting it, but it's a bit more complicated than that. But to start in the beginning, I finished my master's in digital marketing and data science, and I got a job offer I applied and I got the job for a account management position at a company called Xander. Very few people will know what this company is, but they're one of the big competitors to Google when it comes to ad tech. Not in the sense of they're big as in they have a big market share, but of all the competitors, they're probably the biggest one after Google, and they do sell side and demand side thing. So essentially, like, I'm gonna dumb this down because it's a very complicated thing. They sell softwares that help companies either advertise, as in buy ad space online, or sell their ad space. So if you're like it's buying ad space makes sense. There's a block on a website, you want to advertise there, you enter the like online auction, etc. Whereas the sell side is you're a website, you have those blocks, and you have to put it up to sell, and you need to do that through like a platform, and that's something we would provide. Google provides both of the same with DV360 and the Google Display Network. I think it's the Google Display Network for the sell side, but I'm not sure. But anyway, joined that company. I already knew they were being acquired by Microsoft when I joined. It was in the news, and I was actually one of the last people they hired before there was a bit of a hiring freeze because they had gotten acquired. And so I joined that company. I was under an AT&T contract for 2 months before we moved on to Microsoft, where we had the transition where we stopped using Slack and we started using Teams. We had Microsoft emails now that we had to transition into. So we had our Xander emails before, and now it was like Microsoft emails. And it was a very tricky thing to navigate, especially as someone who had just joined, because I joined I learned how to do things from the AT&T perspective for 2 months. And then suddenly I was learning things from the Microsoft perspective, like internal admin tools, except there was no one to help me because no one knew what we were doing. Everyone was learning this as well. And so that part was fine because you're in it with your peers and everything. What was really difficult is that eventually, there was hiring freeze, and then there were layoffs. There were the big tech layoffs around 2023. Yeah, 2023. And I actually got touched by those layoffs. So it was a bit of a forced break, if you want. And, I was lucky that I was working in France where they give you a very nice severance package. And even my manager at the time was like, I've never seen a severance package like be this nice. Like, you're better off taking it. And so I did. I had the option to stay in the company for another 6 months to a year, where if I could find an internal job and apply for it and get in, I could stay at Microsoft. But that seemed unlikely considering it was a hiring freeze and I was quite junior at the time. So I decided to leave, and I tried doing a few things on my own. Like, I tried drop shipping, failed miserably at that. It's very difficult. And then
that's interesting because many young people now is considering, instead of joining big corporations, they just start their own drop shipping business and think they would be successful.
Yeah, what the gurus and all those people selling the drop shipping courses don't tell you is that it's a very competitive place. And while I think there's a lot of merit to the whole drop shipping thing, it's a good way to get into like entrepreneurship. You're gonna have to work really hard, and you have no guarantee of success. And it's not like the more hard work you put in, the more successful you'll be. It's more of the more hard work you put in, the luckier you might be, in which case you might still just never be lucky enough to have one of those products that ends up making a lot of money. And so for people thinking that it's easy, where you just start learning how to drop ship and there's like a guarantee way, just don't do it. It's not worth it unless you're absolutely passionate about it and you're super against joining the corporate world and everything. But it's also during that time that I learned that having a job, as much as some people hate it and some people will say that it's, modern day slavery or whatever, which is a gross exaggeration, it's much nicer, at least for me, to be able to come in, do my 8 hours a day or 9 hours a day or however much time I have to put in, and then just go home, close my laptop, and I know I'm going to get like the same amount of money at the end of the month. Whereas when you're an entrepreneur, you're working weekends, you're working late, you're constantly, trying to do everything to get the business up and running. And it's only when it becomes successful and self-sufficient and profitable that you get to rest, and that can take years, could take a decade even. So that's one thing that no one ever tells you. It's always nice to think like, I'll just go live in Bali as a digital nomad, do my drop shipping, live in a nice house and stuff. That's for 99.9% of people who try and do that. That's not how it's going to go. So, jobs, yes, they're tiring. Yes, they feel a bit soul sucking. But if you're able to disconnect at the end of it, it's worth it, because you get your paycheck, you have vacation, at least in Europe, and you get to go on these nice trips and everything. And you're not worried while you're on your trip that your company might go under. There might be issues with shipping that might make it so that your bottom line at the end of the month is less than you were expecting. So you have to, tighten your food budgets and everything. So yeah, that's like the big thing that I learned from then. But then it took me another like 6 to 7 months to find a job, and I also learned how difficult being unemployed is. It's very soul crushing.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's quite a lot of resilience to go through that time as well.
Yeah, you do need resilience, but it's also a question of like you don't really have a choice. If I had a choice between being resilient and not, and then having it easier, I'd probably choose the easier path. But no one's gonna come here to bail you out, to give you that thing. You have to get a job eventually. There's welfare, yes, and all of that, but usually with the increased like housing prices, cost of living, even living off like welfare isn't going to be that thing that saves you and that gets you through the month. So you learn resilience, yes, but you also kind of don't have a choice but to learn it. And being unemployed, like, I can see why people get depressed when they're unemployed. I can see why it's such a difficult thing to go through. And I wouldn't say I'm grateful I went through it, but I'm grateful for the things that I learned and the perspective it gave me, being unemployed, being difficult. I was lucky that I had my girlfriend. We were splitting rent. I'd gotten a lot of money from Microsoft. So I could survive for a few months and everything. I was in a very lucky position. But even then, I still like went on a few trips with my friends. But towards the end of like, right before I got the job at Google, I was starting to run very low on money, and I was starting to consider maybe taking a much lower salary than I thought I deserved, just because at some point you need to make money. And so it's definitely a very difficult thing to go through being unemployed.
So like for people who in their corporate life at some point, some of them might face that journey, right?
Yeah.
And then thanks to your sharing, we know that you just need to go through it and keep applying and finding the next path. Trying to knock on different doors.
Yeah.
What would be one more things that keep you sane, per se, so that some of us could learn or applying it in the future?
I mean, this is also a bit of a privilege, but it's also something that you build yourself, and just having a very good group of obviously having a good relation with your family is always nice, but it's not always the case. I'm very lucky that I'm on really good terms with all of my family and my siblings and everything. But, there's also the saying, friends are the family you choose. It's important to be surrounded by people who are there for you. Not necessarily people who will pay for your next meal or bail you out in case you need to, or if you're indebted and stuff. It's people who you can just go and hang out with and just have a good time, and it kind of allows you to escape that thing. I actually, have two specific friends in mind who were in Paris with me at the time. A big group of friends, but a lot of them weren't in Paris. Obviously, it's not their fault or anything. But like the two really close friends I had in Paris, I'd see them pretty much weekly, and just hanging out with them and feeling like everything was normal, like I was still part of the friend group, really helps with the self-esteem from being unemployed. Because the thing that really crushes you when you're unemployed, besides worrying about money, besides all of that, is that you're no longer in this position of being able to choose your next job, or you're less so in that position, especially depending on how time sensitive it is if you're running out of your savings. Because if I were to start looking for jobs now, if someone tells me I'll pay you half of what you're getting at Google, I tell them, okay, I'll just stay at Google. But if you're unemployed, you can't stay unemployed forever, and so it becomes a very difficult thing. So it really destroys your self-esteem, because you start feeling like you're not worth all of that. A lot of times, maybe I was a bit arrogant, but I thought that having Microsoft on my CV would be a very big boon to my CV. I'd apply for jobs, and I'd be given salaries that were pennies on the dollar. It's nothing. I wouldn't be able to survive or to exist or anything. And I wasn't even looking for salaries I was looking for salaries lower than what I was earning at Microsoft, and I was still having my expectations, like I was still being disappointed with what companies were offering me. And sometimes you'll even apply for a company, you'll go through the interviews, you'll think you did really well, and then they won't pass you because of one thing or another, just because of the interviewer's technique. Maybe they didn't like you. I've had some case studies where it's like I did the case study really well, and they're like, but you didn't, like, this specific thing that we wanted for this case study, you didn't say, which is impossible for you to guess because it's in their heads. It really destroys your self-esteem. So having a good group of friends, people who can kind of remind you what it's like to be normal and like remind you of your worth is very, very important. So that and playing a lot of video games, which is what I did.
That's good. So to the experience when now you already secure a very good offer in a great team in Google, and you've been here for a few months already. So how is this? If you can summarize like 1 or 2 or 3 biggest surprise when you join Google versus the other companies you work for.
Yeah, definitely.
Surprise could be things, right? Could be good or not so good things. So
yeah. The first thing is you hear about the whole like Googlers and how like the company culture is great and you know, like the Noogler hat and everything. And I think I really underestimated how many good friends I would make through like my sales school, which is what Nooglers who are joining like a sales role go through before actually starting to work with clients. That's just really nice. I feel like I've made some very good friends, and you know, these are people that I enjoy spending time with, especially since I moved countries. I'm in a place where I think I knew 1 or 2 people here in Dublin, but I'm not even that close with them. They're people I knew from friends of friends. That's like that's one of the big surprises, just kind of how good Google seems to be at selecting people who are just enjoyable and interesting to spend time around. And I don't know if this is just a testament of how good like the Google interviews have become at like getting googly people, or if it's just continuous luck. But that's one thing that really shocked me. Another thing, and this is probably a bit less good, and maybe it's just because I had low expectations, is that, you know, a lot of times when I saw my one friend who worked at Google, he seemed like he was just having a good time all the time. You know, and what I mean by that is that, you know, he didn't seem like he was working that hard. And so I guess that's something I kind of expected, just for the job to not be necessarily any more difficult than any other job. And maybe I confused that with being easier than any other job, but you know, I just went through my first quarter on target. Man, it's not like, maybe it's because I'm a Noogler and I'm still learning and stuff, but it's intense.
It's intense, yeah. It could be really intense, especially during these quarters.
Exactly. It's a very intense thing, but it's not necessarily a bad thing. As someone, and you know, before joining here, I was spending a lot of days doing absolutely nothing, because when you're applying, you know, after you've sent your CV to all the companies out there, there's not much more you can do. I kind of missed this sort of challenge that you get from like being in a job where you get asked something you don't know and you kind of just have to figure it out. You know, and that challenge is very, very interesting to me, because I'm learning a lot. And you know, my younger self would never admit to this, but I genuinely think that there's nothing more enjoyable in life than learning new things. You know, it's whether it's a new sport, a new job, a new hobby like knitting. I learned how to knit once. It's
really
very fun. Yeah,
you should bring to the team.
Yeah, I'm not very good at it, but I learn it. And so I'm someone who's always like learning things, and that's one thing that's really interesting as well from our position is we get to talk to a lot of different businesses and across multiple different industries. And so you're always learning something, even from like being in the call with the client. It's a bit cliche, but it's true. But it's definitely very challenging. I haven't enjoyed it as much as I wanted to, because I've also been like, I need to hit my targets.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
You know what? We've been 2/3 of our conversation, and I was wondering myself whether the audience later can hear us clearly, because I just realized we didn't have a microphone.
Well, we'll figure this out after. Yeah,
After
this is editing's problem. I don't know. I think they should be able to hear us.
Okay, that's cool.
There's a little blue icon over there that seems like it hears us talking.
So the next part, I want to understand more about. Gonna be a very interesting few questions to understand about your belief and your perspective. So the idea, I mean, for the listener as well, is one day Raymond and me and another colleague were just talking randomly after we had so many customer calls, and suddenly we talk about life and philosophy.
Yeah, we were all very, like, our brains were very fried that day. We were all just like, oh.
Yeah. So and after talking to you and the other colleague was like, oh man, I should have recorded this conversation. And then that's the idea for the whole conversation with you. So what do you think is a set of belief that define who you are?
Coming in with the hard questions now. Set of beliefs that define who I am. I mean, if there's one thing that could summarize me best, is just be kind to other people, and helpful. And I think being helpful is being kind as well. I'm someone who oftentimes, well, not oftentimes, but sometimes even to my own detriment, I'm always trying to help people. It's also one of the things that I really appreciate about the Google culture is that, everyone, you ask someone a question and they will either tell you, I'll answer it later, or they'll answer it now. And it's just something that to me is a very quintessential thing that people should have. Why wouldn't you? Why wouldn't you be kind? Why wouldn't you try and be helpful? It's a very core belief to myself. Maybe it's naive. For some people might consider it naive and everything, but I'm always willing to help. I'm always willing to be kind, to be the sympathetic ear, to help people going through tough times, even if I'm not necessarily close to them. But I always default to being kind and empathetic to everyone. And it's only if that person is really taking advantage of me, or someone who, is not really great, that I'll stop being, kind. I'll always be respectful and nice and stuff, but they'll lose the privileges of having kind Raymond.
I guess to your point earlier, why wouldn't we, right? So what I could think of is in many of the business textbook or worldview leaders in the past, when we heard from, there's a saying that nice guys finish last, right? Yeah. How would you respond to someone who think like that or believe? Yeah,
they don't have to. It's a conscious decision that some people are taking of nice guys finish last. I also think there's a weird bastardization of that saying. There's, I don't know if you ever heard of this, but the nice guys, the people who think that they deserve something for being nice. I don't know if you've ever come across this on Reddit or something, but it's this whole thing where it's some guy will be nice to someone, or it's mostly to girls, and that they expect something in return just because they were nice.
So
and-
give and take.
Yeah,
Versus,
it's in which case you're no longer being nice. You're trying to set up a quid pro quo, a trade or anything. I don't think. Do I think that nice guys finish last all the time? No. Do I think that it happens more often than it should? Yes. I think it's maybe something that needs to shift in our common perspective as like a culture and a society where we should really value nice people, people doing things for the good of them. For example, I don't know how true this is, but I have seen this around a bunch of times where the inventor of the seatbelt, the 3-point seatbelt we're all used to work at that. I think he was worked at Volvo or something. And he released the patent for free to everyone.
Wow.
And it's one of the inventions that saves the most lives constantly because, seatbelts save lives. That's another piece of advice. Always wear your seatbelt. But he doesn't gain anything from doing this, but he's helping so many people, and society is better for that. There's another example. There's this Japanese scientist, and it's a personal example because I have a cat. But there's this Japanese scientist, which I believe is called Miyazaki, who invented a vaccine for cats that prolongs their life by about 15 years.
Wow.
So instead of living only for around 15 to 20 years, they live to 30 to 35 years because a lot of the issues is with kidney failure. And he solved that with a vaccine. And he's making it publicly available. He's not selling it for a lot of money. He's making it so that every cat owner can afford this. Well, afford is a different question, but he's not trying to profit off of this invention. And why wouldn't you want to do that? Why should according to nice guys finish last, this guy should finish last. But on the contrary, I think we should give him an award or something. It's a crazy invention. It's great. And I think every single cat owner or even pet owner will understand just how important that is to them. And if we keep moving towards a nice guys finish last mentality as a society, no one's going to be doing that. And it's always going to be we're going to be at each other's throats.
So another perspective, I'm not, I'm 100%, I'm just playing devil advocate, exactly.
Yeah, of course.
So another set of belief is only rich people, rich privileged people or countries or people could afford nice or kindness. So because someone who was born privileged, then they can have the ability to be nice to other people.
Do you mean the ability or the ability to have that mentality of being nice?
Yeah.
The second one.
Yeah. So you are willing to give more because you don't. Yeah, you have so much resources.
Yeah, I mean, I come from a privileged background. My parents are quite wealthy and stuff, and I definitely understand that. It is a privilege to be able to have these types of conversations and thoughts. I don't know what it's like to not be able to make ends meet, for my parents to be stressed out about, putting food on the table. So I can't speak from that perspective. I don't think I'm the best person to speak from that perspective, but I like to think and I like to believe that being nice isn't just about being able to give monetary value. It's, you see someone struggling to carry their bag up the stairs in the metro, you help them. Just that act of kindness is just making the world a better place and stuff. And I think it's also especially important to be kind to kids. I have this sort of dilemma, this argument where with my girlfriend, where she's much nicer to old people, whereas I'm much nicer to kids. And I think it's like this difference in perspective, because like an old person's lived their whole life. I'm not saying you should be mean to old people. I'm just saying you also don't know what this old person's done throughout their lives. There's no guarantee that they have any sort of innocence, where kids are just inherently innocent. They haven't learned how to do these things. If they're doing something mean or bad, it's not out of maliciousness. It's, I mean, unless they're a psychopath or something, that's like a very fringe scenario. They don't know better. And if they do something wrong and you go over there and you punish them and you're like mean to them, or you're like, you know, just being like, oh, you're a kid, like, you know, do better. That's not setting a good example for the kids, in my opinion. I think it's much more important to like be nice to kids, help them understand, you know, the value of things. There's this saying that says it takes a village to raise a kid, or I don't know if it was a village or something, but like, you know, there's this idea of communal upbringing. And I think that's lost a lot in big cities and stuff, but I think it's definitely something that we should, as a society, shift more towards, where it's, you know, more towards doing that sort of thing. I know I'm completely like on the, I'm not answering your question at all. I don't feel like I could have I don't think my answer holds any value, because I come from a very privileged background. I'm not the right person to necessarily like answer that, but as a person who has had a lot of privilege, I think it's especially important for me to be kind and to use my privilege to help other people get to places where they can have the same level of privilege as me. I know a lot of people will say like, oh, but you know, your family worked hard and everything. Sure, my family worked hard and everything. I didn't. I was just lucky and I was born into this family. I haven't earned anything in terms of like being able to live this privileged life. And so this is my way of giving back as well. It's just being nice, being kind, being helpful, just trying to make the world a better place. If we could all leave the world in a better state than when we found it, it would be better.
Which link to my next question. One of the few last questions. So imagine the best version of yourself. What would bring you closer to that version?
The best version of myself. I already kind of like the person that I am. It's the best person of myself is someone I'm constantly trying to be. I falter. No one's perfect, but it does go back to this idea of just like kindness and trying to be as helpful as possible and stuff. You know, sometimes when someone asks me for help or something, I don't feel like it. I'm cozy in my bed. I'm busy with work. I'm doing that. So sometimes I'll just be like, oh, I'm busy. And I think that's a valid thing for some people, but for me, I really want to be as helpful as possible. And so it'd be to be less lazy and less, you know, motivated by comfort, when helping someone means taking that comfort away.
So to wrap up, last questions.
Yes.
What's worth suffering for?
What?
What is worth suffering for?
You're not pulling your punches with these questions. What is worth suffering for? Friends and family. At least for me, I would do anything for my friends and my family. You know, I suffer a lot. If it meant that it saved them, you know, any suffering and stuff like that, as a kid, I told myself that I'd live until I was 102, and that's when I would finally rest and die. And I think part of it comes from the fact that I don't want other people to have to deal with being sad over me dying. So that's the little. I'm sure I need to deal with this in therapy at some point. But I think if you can get yourself a good group of friends, and if you're lucky enough to be born in a family that's very supportive, with parents who love you and siblings who love you, which I was, on top of being born into a wealthy family, I was born into a family that's very close and tight. Friends as well, like just take care of them. Like that's the only thing, in my opinion, that is really, really worth living for. It makes my life so much easier. Like I was so much less like, when you're moving to a new country, you're always afraid, what if I can't make any friends? What if I don't find my place and everything? And I've never had that worry, because it's like, I don't need new friends because I have really good ones. It would be nice, it's always nice to have more, but I know that I can fall back on these friends when times get rough and everything. My family as well.
Amazing. Thank you, Raymond, for sharing your
Mary.
life with me.
Sorry that I've rambled a lot.
No, it was very interesting, and I hope everyone gonna enjoy it as well.
Yeah.
Just like I do.